Welcome back. You're watching the Citizen Business Center. The hashtag is Citizen Business. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta's recent trip to Uganda has now flared up into a fully blown political tussle, with former Prime Minister Raila Odinga claiming that the business deals signed in Uganda were not in keeping with national interests. So what exactly happened in Uganda? What we know so far is that the Kenyan and Ugandan Chambers of Commerce signed memoranda, the nature of which we will interrogate on tonight's show. Secondly, we also know that the two governments agreed to open up their markets further, with Kenya agreeing to buy Uganda's surplus sugar, and Uganda, on the other hand, indicating it would open its markets for Kenyan beef and related dairy products. Now, 2 months ago, a diplomatic spat emerged between the two countries after Kenya decided to limit sugar imports from the EAC. So does the former Prime Minister have a valid point? Let's now speak to Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chairman Kiprono Kitonyi, who now joins us live on phone. Kiprono, good evening. You were part of the delegation that was in Uganda. Can you distinguish for our viewers what is the politics and what is the benefits for the ordinary citizen? And perhaps, in fact, just to start it off, what exactly did the Chamber of Commerce sign?
The Chamber of Commerce signed an MOU with the Uganda Chamber of Commerce. We signed these sort of protocols in several markets, and they are aimed at promoting trade and investment between countries. They have very broad frameworks of engagement, and basically they provide an avenue for engagement between two countries or even more.
Kiprono, I need to ask you, were there particular deals signed between the Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber of Uganda, the Chamber of Commerce in Kenya and the Chamber in Uganda?
Like I said, we do sign memorandums of understanding, and these MOUs are broad frameworks of engagement. We don't sign any specific deals. Specific deals are signed directly by the business parties concerned, and we normally take delegations and we organize business forums, and basically it is for the business community to engage themselves in direct trade, commerce and investment. All we do is sign MOUs that provide for a broad framework of engagement, and also a reporting structure for issues that come in between that sort of reduce the flow of trade and investment.
Kiprono, of course this has now flared into a political tussle, as I mentioned in my intro, and we do know that the Chamber of Commerce is a private sector-led organization. However, it is patronized by President Uhuru Kenyatta, and my question is, can the Chamber, under any circumstance, sign any deals on behalf of the government?
The Chamber of Commerce signs deals on behalf of the private sector. We do not sign deals on behalf of the government. And I think, Kellyanne, we are missing the point as Kenyans. We are politicizing everything. What we need to do is to remind ourselves, I mean, did we or did we not sign onto a common market for East Africa? If we did, that's the issue we need to be discussing. We need to be looking at the issues of efficiency in our sugar industry, and not just, whether or not Uganda can supply sugar into Kenya. I think we are missing the point.
All right. Kiprono, thank you so much for joining us and shedding light on the exact role of the Chamber of Commerce in Uganda over the weekend. And now let's get some more insights into this matter. And I'm joined by Kwame Owino, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Kwame, first things first, what do you make out of this? Quite confusing, I must say, information coming through from Raila. Some say his points are actually valid. Just before we get into the discussion itself, what were your initial thoughts about this?
Well, I think my initial thoughts was when I saw this reported in the press, I had to go back and ask myself, look, if the Kenyan government and the Ugandan government are going to sign anything, it would be superfluous, because already most of the trade between Uganda and Kenya is supposed to be managed through the EAC framework and the Common Market Protocol. We are heading towards a customs union and over time into a monetary union. So what would this be that is outside the EAC, the treaty? So that's the first thing. And my view would be, if anything was signed, it would be complicating the treaty even further, because right now we know what the main issues are: to take out the non-tariff barriers and to ensure that the customs union and the common market work perfectly. So I was iffy, and I think, as I confirm, perhaps as Kenyans, we overreacted to it, and obviously for a big political voice to then level it up with the president means that we all followed a route that wasn't entirely correct, and I'm glad the clarification has since been made.
All right. So you're saying that Raila's thoughts about the deals were signed for personal reasons don't hold any water? Is that what you're saying?
Okay, I'm not in Raila's mind nor the president, so I can't speak for any of them. But what I can say is that the charge or the claim that obviously a deal was signed and the contents of the claim, which are very, very specific, in my view, would have required some cross-checking first on his part. And obviously, as has been clarified right now, that was not possible, and it would not have happened outside the framework of the East African community. That's the point. So to that extent, yes, I think he was in error here.
All right. Let's talk about sugar, and of course this is it's a very sensitive issue in Kenya today, and some people are asking why sugar. Why did the Kenyan government have to take sugar from Uganda,
yes.
And we had the president earlier saying, I'd rather take sugar from Uganda than from Brazil. But we know that there was a spot where sugar is involved. The sugar cartels in our country that the government has not been able to firmly deal with. Was it the right time to talk about sugar with Uganda?
Yes, it's certainly the right time. I think one of the things as Kenyans we must never forget is that whatever we want to call them, the sugar daddies, the sugar patrons, the cartels and everything else, Kenya does not produce enough sugar for our own consumption. So we have a deficit that is substantial that we need to import, and it must be imported from somewhere. So whether it comes from Brazil or Uganda or anywhere else, it needs to get its way here. One, because we have a growing population and the demand for sugar is there, but we don't meet the quantum that is required to do that. So if the president or if the administration decided, look, let's try and make opportunity for us to import sugar from across, we have a framework under COMESA which determines the quotas that Kenya can maintain for the purposes of protecting our own sugar industry, which I think is receiving far too much protection. So to charge the president with the claim that he's trying to destroy Kenya's sugar, I think is rich, to be honest. It's not very honest. And yes, we have that deficit. We have to meet it from somewhere else. We meet it very expensively, and because of the corruption that is related to who actually imports it and where it comes from, then there's a very huge markup, and most of that does not benefit Kenyans. It actually benefits the people who have these imports. So something definitely needs to be done.
All right, and on the corruption side, one of the issues that the Kenyan authorities had actually raised before is that Ugandan traders were importing sugar cheaply, maybe even from Brazil.
Okay.
We would probably never know that, and then repackage it and exporting it to lucrative markets such as Kenya. Isn't this now creating space for that kind of corruption?
Yes, but that's our problem. Part of the problem being that if somebody is dumping sugar in Uganda and that sugar is making its way into Kenya, the reason it becomes that is because our tariffs are too high. They're artificially high, and basically we are protecting companies that have failed, Mumias and all the others that have failed to provide us with sugar at cost-effective rates, and therefore providing an avenue for somebody to import cheap sugar, as we call it, and then sell it here. And the tariff actually just means that this person makes much more money than they would have made otherwise, and making the entire industry corrupt, both on the production side and also on the import side. That's something we can solve here. It is not Uganda's problem, it's Kenya's problem.
Let's talk about Mumias. And last month, the president handed a 1 billion shilling check, a lifeline, so to speak, to Mumias Sugar. Does this counter? Are we saying, we want to save our sugar industry, but then again, we are fine if we can get the sugar from somewhere else? Well,
there are two things that the government can't do. I think it supports, there's incoherence, to be honest. We provide 1 billion shillings, that could be as much as 2 billion shillings. Yes, it's a loan, as they say, to a sugar company. And then on the other hand, we are dealing with imports. But that's the situation in which we are. We have an incoherent sugar manufacturing and production policy. On the one hand, you are supporting sugar farmers or the sugar factories. Actually, we are supporting the sugar factories. Then there's a deficit, and we have to import it. And then, on the other hand, again, allowing some of those sugar farms to import quotas, which they fail to provide and make money off it. So they have no incentive to produce locally. But I think the big thing is for us as Kenyans to actually calm down. And because of this incoherence that has happened in the last 2 months, it's time for us to calm down, and somebody, perhaps the president, perhaps the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, to actually say, is Kenya competitive in sugar? And I'd go half the way. I think 80% of the time Kenya is not.
All right, beef, also another sticky point. And I guess the reason why Kenyans are overreacting, in a sense, as you mentioned before, is that Kenya Meat Commission is on its knees.
Yes.
You know, so who's going to export that meat to Uganda?
Well, Nairobi alone. I mean, I think I do not underrate Kenya's business people, to be honest.
The private sector.
Kenya's private sector is actually very capable of it. I mean, they provide, if you look at the East African region, with the exception of Dar es Salaam, Nairobi has the largest population density around this area, Mombasa and all these other places. But for some reason, beef is available. So if they're able to supply Nairobi, I am sure they'd be able to supply other parts of this country, provided the standards were available and all that. So it doesn't have to be the Kenya Meat Commission, another failing institution that we've pumped money in for forever. I'm confident that a new facility could provide it, including the ones that provide it in Nairobi right now, are able to send meat, or rather send beef and other dairy products as well as part of this into the East African region. Because on a regional basis, Kenya's dairy industry is actually one of the most efficient in the African continent.
I want to drag you in a bit into the political angles of this discussion, especially when it comes to dairy, largely because, you know, Brookside is owned by the Kenyatta family. When the Chamber of Commerce went to Nigeria, there was news that Brookside was going to open, you know, a factory in Nigeria. I understand that they have also bought into some private companies in Uganda. So the issue about personal interests might arise at some point, or did arise actually, as mentioned by Raila Odinga. What are your thoughts on that issue? Okay,
I didn't hear about Raila Odinga make a comment about this, but I also I don't think that Kenya's president or the administration so far should actually hold their tracks regarding expanding trade. I mean, at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we support free trade. Whoever it benefits, I think, is necessarily a good thing for the country. So if the charge is that perhaps this deal was meant entirely to open up for one industry, well, they're going to have to compete in Nigeria anyway. If an opportunity is opened up in Uganda as well, other Kenyan farms or other farms from around the world would also compete. So on that basis alone, I don't think it's fair to actually make that charge. If, for instance, there was something else in that, in our trade policy, which constrains other farms but allow a single farm, whether associated with Prime Minister, or I mean a former Prime Minister, or somebody in government, or the President, as is claimed here, then that would be something for us to mean. But if it would be open to all Kenyan farms, for instance, and all farms within East Africa, anything that expands free trade within East Africa and the world is a good thing for Kenyans. All right, I'm told we've got some questions or some comments coming through from our social media handles. If we can have a look at those, Kwame, because I'd like your opinion on the same. Importation of sugar from wherever still won't change situation with Mumia's sugar. I think you alluded to that in just now. Esbon says all the sugar companies were closing before this deal. Esbon, I think, makes some sense as well. And Honorable Florence Mutua said a current study needs to be done to ascertain the current consumption of sugar vis-a-vis the production. And Sir Anthony _K, you say local sugar farmers have been complaining before this deal came through, so who is accountable? Otieno Steve, you say, must we import if we can promote other local producers? Sugar millers, Mohoroni, Cabras, Nzoia, Sony, Chemelil, just to name a few. Clearly the sugar issue really standing out. Do you want to respond to one of those? Yes. I think sugar production in Kenya didn't start with this deal. It's been with us. And since the early 80s, Kenya's sugar industry has been suffering. We had quotas to supply quota-free, and or rather to supply sugar at whatever price in the European Union, and we never once managed to actually take up those quotas. Why? Because we are not producing enough. So we can't hold everything back to the fact that, look, until Kenya's sugar industry grows, it's not going to. I suspect, I would bet that it wouldn't. So we can't also hold our trade policy hostage to the fact that, look, we will not do anything else unless Kenya's sugar industry. I mean, economies don't work like that. We have a dairy industry to try and promote. We have an industry for leather. We have an industry for beef. We have an industry for all manner of things. And so we cannot hold every Kenyan policy hostage to sugar companies, sugar factories in the western part of Kenya, or wherever else they may exist. I think what government can do that is fair is to start to think, fine, what happens if we need to think about an exit? And an exit is something that we cannot keep forever in the back envelope. It's time for us to start thinking about an exit.
All right. Kwame Owino, the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs, giving us some insights into the Kenya-Uganda sugar, beef, dairy deal, so to speak. Thank you so much, Kwame, for that. And what we know now is that there's no deal between the governments of Kenya and Uganda, and that the Chamber of Commerce, the National Chamber of Commerce, has said that they signed a general memorandum of understanding between Kenya and Uganda, and there was no particular deal signed. Kenya did agree to open up its sugar markets to surplus sugar from Uganda, while Uganda agreed to open up its beef markets to Kenyan exporters, but nothing signed yet on paper. We'll be back right after this break.